If my mother, who went through hell, never broke down, how can I ever break down?
She told you to put butter on your lips.
That's right. Even when you're feeling hungry, don't tell the world you're feeling hungry.
Your books, your articulation of your thoughts, all of it is about promoting yourself. How would you respond to it?
The whole point of writing is to make sure that people read them. At the end of the day, whatever I'll be judged by will be what I've written. I would encourage all my fellow Singaporeans to engage in shameless self-promotion by writing books.
Hi.
Hey, hi, Viswa.
Kishore.
Good
How
to
are
see you. Good to see you.
Snazzy jacket. Here's going to be a drink for you and for me.
There we go. Good.
Thank
My
you.
favorite drink.
Thank you very much.
Whiskey soda.
Cheers to a great interview.
Thank you.
Kishore, my dear friend, welcome to this interview, to Inconvenient Questions. I will try and make it as uninconvenient as possible. Right. First and foremost, congratulations on the launch of your 10th book. Is it your 10th book?
10th book, yes.
Yeah, and it's amazing that you have written 10 books over a period of, what, 26 years?
Yeah,
first
26 years.
Your
But I
first book.
produced 5 books in the last 7 years.
So you're a lot more productive with
Since I stepped down as Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.
Why? Is that because
I
you have
mean,
more
I don't
time?
if you don't have a full-time job, I can do full-time writing. And then this amazing book, the Asian 21st Century, which has had 3.58 million downloads.
Oh, that's the one that went online.
Went online.
Yeah.
And I must say, I did that book with great resentment,
Why?
saying, why am I wasting my time producing a free book? They were targeting 20,000 downloads. And they got 3.58 million. 8 million. I mean, and that's amazing.
Now,
In 160 countries, by the way.
it's amazing. I was going to ask you, because one would think that it mainly the Chinese who would download, and that's probably where the numbers came from. But you're saying more than 100 countries.
Well, I can tell you the top 5 countries.
Yeah.
And by the way, this book was in English, not in Chinese. The country with the largest number of downloads was Malaysia, about 700,000. Singapore, with 600,000.
600,000.
I had no idea that Singapore had 600,000 book readers. Amazing.
Did you have a
Number
lot of
3,
pictures of
Number
you?
3, no pictures at all. 0 pictures. All as is. None of my books have pictures. And then the third one was, I think, United States. Number 4 was Australia. Number 5 was China.
So, Kishore, let me take you to the most recent book you launched, your memoir. It's titled Living the Asian Century, an Undiplomatic Memoir, right? Now, you were very blunt, actually, about yourself. I was quite surprised when I read that in your early transcript. You said, and I quote, "I must have come across as being very cocky and self-confident, and when you are cocky and self-confident, you invite detractors." You said that. You know, I must confess, the first time I met you professionally was when I was a producer in Current Affairs Division in SBC in 1984, and I did think you were cocky. And I did think you were cocky because you had a smirk, and you also did not look at me when you spoke to me. You know, there was an eye contact, you know. So, quick question. You project yourself as being very self-confident, but I read it as seriously insecure. Were you?
Well, but in my book, I describe how insecure I was. You know, when you come from a very humble upbringings, and I try to describe, as you know, my humble upbringings. When I went to school at the age of 6, I was put on a special feeding program because I was technically undernourished. Now you can see I'm overnourished.
And you were on the milk program, right?
And yeah, the principal called about 12 boys. I mean, there must have been maybe 100 boys who joined the school, primary one. And the only 12 were selected to go to the principal's office at recess time, and there was one pail of milk, one ladle. So all 12 boys drank from the same ladle, passing on our germs to each other, which is
No
good.
wonder you're so strong.
Because you develop your immune systems.
Yes.
And, you know, our house had no flush toilet.
This is your house in Onan.
Onan, 179 Onan Road, which is amazing. The house is still there.
Yeah.
It's quite shocking. It hasn't been torn down. And we were paying rent of $17.60 a month. But even that was a challenge. And when my dad lost his job and borrowed money, the debt collectors would come to our house. And sometimes when the Chinese gangsters came, my dad would look terrified and roll under the bed when they came, you know. So we lived through a lot of stress. There was no flush toilet in the house. The guys coming in the morning to remove the cans. So it was a very different Singapore that I grew up in. So,
and made you tough and tougher
yeah,
and
I think
more
no,
resilient?
but in fact, you know, one of the best blurbs I got from my book was one from one of the most famous men in the world. His name is Martin Wolf. He's a chief economics commentator for the Financial Times. And initially he was hesitant to give me a blurb, but after he finished reading the book, he gave me this incredibly enthusiastic blurb. And then he said, Kishore, you know who's the real hero in your memoirs? I said, who? He said, your mother. And it's true, because my mother went through hell. You know, as a child, you don't experience the same kind of hell that the parents go through. And to me, what I always remember is that no matter how amazing the pressure on her was, no matter how, when you live in a broken, dysfunctional home, the daily pressures, she never broke down.
Right.
So for me, my motto in my life was that if my mother, who went through hell, never broke down, how can I ever break down? You know? So,
and in fact, there was an interesting line, right? She told you to put butter on your lips.
That's right.
And smile.
And she taught us that even when you're feeling hungry, don't tell the world you're feeling hungry. Just put some butter. Actually, I think what she would have said probably was ghee. Put ghee on your lips and smile and tell everyone you're very well fed, you know?
Yeah.
But so, she basically, more by example, she taught us courage and endurance. So I think that gift from my mother was enormous, and I've never had a chance to say a proper thank you to her. And I hope that this book, as Martin Wolf says, is in many ways a tribute to the woman who saved me.
I think that explains, to me at least, that explains how you have often bounced back even when you are punched in the nose. And I'll come to that in a while, but that's the imagery I have, you know. You've had many detractors. You've had clearly detractors.
I want to submit an entry into the Guinness Book of World Records.
Number of detractors.
Number of detractors. I think I'm number one in the world.
Maybe you're underestimating your lack of popularity. Yeah. No, actually, I think the number of detractors you have is not as high as one would imagine. You know, it's just that sometimes the detractors have louder voices. Right. Now, one of the detractors is Professor Donald Emerson, who was a long-time head of the Southeast Asia program in Stanford University. He's clearly not a big fan of yours. You know, he's written quite extensively, very critical of you intellectually, for example. You know, this is what he said about you. Mahbubani is entirely right to acknowledge the massive improvement in the material welfare of China's people that has taken place under its authoritarian regime since 1970s. But in its writing, Mahbubani has been far less willing to acknowledge the historical fact of bad governance in China, whose Maoist regime was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 40 plus million of its own citizens between 1949 and 1975, not to mention the official repression of Tibet. What's your response?
Well, I mean, I know Don Emerson. When we were together, he would have described himself as a friend. There's always a personal dimension to all this. And Don Emerson saw himself as a leading Southeast Asian scholar, and he did some good work on Indonesia. But I think he resented the fact that more people were paying attention to me than to him.
How do you know that?
I was in several panels with him. I know him very well as a person. So I think what I found.
Are you being smug?
Huh?
Are you being smug in saying that?
Not being smug. I know him very well, and I feel sorry for him that he had to do that. And the point about him is that he will take selective quotes and not see the whole picture. And for him to dismiss the achievements of China was a sort of clever rhetorical tool that he used, you know. But he's not a China specialist. And he actually got used to being treated like God when he went to Indonesia. And then he found that over some time people got disillusioned with him. So, I mean, there's a personal side to this story.
But what he said, what he cited, are not untruths. For example, the repression in Tibet. We shan't go too deep into these, but I'd like to move away from Don Emerson and come closer to home. Let's talk about the aggressive stance adopted by China in the South China Sea, you know, in direct confrontation with the Philippines. Right? That has had an impact on us, on ASEAN. I've not seen you highlight that or comment on that. Did it not matter to you enough?
Well, then I would encourage you to read the New Asian Hemisphere.
Okay.
You know, I produced 10 books, right, this year. And in the New Asian Hemisphere, there's a section on the South China Sea, and in which I say that the 9-dash line that China has drawn in the South China Sea has no basis in international law. And I've also pointed out that it's been a huge mistake, a huge strategic mistake for China to try and claim any kind of sovereignty over the South China Sea, because what that does is that it undermines the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and it undermines the territorial rights to whatever it is, 10 miles, 12 miles, whatever it is, in the EEZ to 200 kilometers, because that it undermines China's interest, because China is now a bigger maritime power than the United States, much bigger. There are more Chinese goods traveling on the seas than American goods. American hardly exports any manufactured products. China exports amazing amount of manufactured products. So China needs open access to the seas. So China needs a global regime whereby countries will not claim large bodies of water around them.
But you did say categorically that what China did in the South China Sea was not legal.
Did you
say that?
I said the 9-dash line has no basis in international law. By the way, in common English, it means it's not legal.
Absolutely. Now, so that would get us to segue to a very important incident that happened in 2017. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is it goes back to prove the point that you are a comeback kid. You know. Now, I know that this is going to be unpleasant to you, but I'm going to raise it anyway. Right. Now, in 2017, you wrote a piece in the Straits Times, and it's titled "Big Lessons for a Small Country," and I'd like to read excerpts of it. You said, Qatar ignored an eternal rule of geopolitics. Small states must behave like small states. What's the first thing we should do? Exercise discretion. We should be very restrained in commenting on matters involving great powers. Hence, it would have been wiser to be more circumspect on the judgment of an international tribunal on the arbitration which the Philippines instituted against China concerning the South China Sea dispute, especially since the Philippines, which was involved in the case, did not want to press it. When I hear some of our official representatives say that we would take a consistent and principled stand on geopolitical issues, I am tempted to remind them that consistency and principle are important, but cannot be the only trait that define our diplomacy. And there is a season for everything. The best time to speak up for our principles is not necessarily in the heat of a row between bigger powers. When I was ambassador to the United Nations in 2003, Singapore supported the American invasion of Iraq, even though it was not endorsed by the UN Security Council. As Mr. Kofi Annan said, who was then the Secretary General of the UN, this made it an illegal war. However, we prudently followed our geopolitical interests, not our principles in Iraq war. This is the gist of what you said, right? Now, as you would remember, it received a very rigorous rebuttal from one of your colleagues in MFA, former colleagues, Bilahari Kausikan. And I'd like to read excerpts of his rebuttal. I have no quarrel with what Kishore has to say about regionalism and the UN. But his first lesson, that small states must always behave like small states, is muddled, mendacious, and indeed dangerous. Kishore once never tired of saying that we must punch above our weight. He obviously has changed his mind. Kishore says Mr. Lee Kuan Yew never behaved as the leader of a small country and earned the right to state his views because he was respected by the major powers. True, but how did he earn that right? Mr. Lee and his comrades did not earn respect by being meekly compliant to the major powers. They were not reckless, but they did not hesitate to stand up for their ideals and principles when they had to. They did not earn the respect of the major powers, and Singapore did not survive and prosper by being anybody's tame poodle. In 2010, then PRC, China's Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi, at an ASEAN meeting was reported to have publicly and pointedly reminded ASEAN that China was a big country, staring at then Foreign Minister George Yeo. Mr. Yeo reportedly stared back. I am profoundly disappointed that Kishore should advocate subordination as a norm of Singapore foreign policy. It made me ashamed. I know you chose at that point in time, in 27, not to respond because it would have escalated the matter and turned ugly or uglier. But this is an opportunity for you to respond to it. Perhaps not to Bilahari per se, but respond to the situation and perhaps shed some light on your motivation for writing that article.
Well, why don't I tie it to the writing of the book? Because since you mentioned Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, one of the reasons why I wrote this book is that many Singaporeans, especially the young Singaporeans, don't understand how incredibly brilliant, shrewd, and wily the three founding fathers of Singapore were, especially Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, and Rajaratnam. And what I try to do in my memoirs is to tell stories that describe how brilliant they were. In fact, I often claim that one reason why Singapore has been an exceptionally successful state is that our founding fathers may have been as brilliant, if not more brilliant, than the founding fathers of the United States of America. And one of the great privileges of my life is that I got to spend a lot of time with them. You mentioned the Iraq War. I can tell you, when I happened to come back to Singapore for some reason,
when
I was ambassador to UN in New York. I was in New York from 1998 to 2004 in the build-up to the Iraq War. And I remember I was invited to meet Mr. Lee Kuan Yew about a month or two or so, a few months before the war. And sure enough, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew asked the inevitable question, so do you think the United States is going to invade Iraq? And I said, I'm really sorry to inform you that they are going to invade Iraq. And I can tell you he gave a very deep sigh, very deep sigh. Sort of, he knew so well that this would be a disaster, but he could do nothing to stop it. So, the Lee Kuan Yew's capacity to understand geopolitical issues is just amazing, off the charts. And you could see that this disaster was coming with the invasion. And in the case of Rajaratnam, I give you another example. This is an example of prudence. Again,
sorry, before you do that, what was the position adopted by Singapore? Exactly. Why did we adopt the position we?
Well, I think it was very clear that our leaders calculated that our good relations with the United States were the most important thing.
Of strategic interest to us.
Strategic interest of Singapore. And so if we had to go along with the US, we would go along with it, which by the way, is a rational thing to do, not necessarily irrational. But I was going to give you an example of prudence. This also happened when I was ambassador to the UN. And this happened in my first tour of duty, I think 84 to 89. And at that time, as you know, the Prime Minister of Malaysia was Mahathir. And Mahathir decided, Mahathir, as you know, is a remarkable personality. He's prepared to do brave things, as they say. So he decided that the claims made by all the Western powers on Antarctica was so unfair. Why should the richest countries seize all the wealth of Antarctica? Why couldn't the poor countries like Malaysia? And frankly, Mahathir was right. Why should the wealthy countries take all the resources of Antarctica? Antarctica should be a common heritage of humanity. And so I thought this is a great idea. So I wrote a note to MFA as Ambassador UN, hey, we should support Dr. Mahathir against these wealthy countries who are trying to seize the resources of Antarctica.
How old were you then?
I was very young, in my 30s then. But obviously Rajaratnam was much wiser than me. He saw this. Obviously Mahathir is going to fight the Westerners. He saw no reason why even if it's the right thing to do, why should Singapore unnecessarily alienate these Western countries? So he said no, and he gave me very strict, categorical instructions. Amazingly, because Rajaratnam was a very nice, flexible guy. But when it came to this issue, he was very, very clear.
Non-negotiable.
He basically said, Kishore, you should not open your mouth on Antarctica, basically. So I kept my mouth shut. Even though I thought what Mahathir was doing the right thing. So, that's prudence, you know. So this is where I think our leaders, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, and Rajaratnam, were amazing geopolitical masters. And frankly, I believe that I could not have written 10 books if I hadn't sat at the feet of these three masters and learned from them it's an art, it's not a science, it's an art. Okay? This is not like Newton's law or whatever it is. This is an art. An art for understanding how geopolitics works, how complex it is. The interplay of history, economics, leaders, all coming together, and then you get to see the whole big picture.
It's not a clear-cut binary issue.
Yeah, and it's very, very, very complex. And basically, I learned from Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, and Rajaram the art of mastering complexity, and try to explain the complexity in ways that could reach out to everybody. So, my book was in one way, in a personal level, a tribute to my mother, because I really think without her I wouldn't have succeeded. But at the same time, my book, I also hope, is a tribute to Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, and Rajaratnam, because looking back now, I'm amazed at how much I learned from them.
Was that the point broadly that you were trying to make in your 2017 article?
Well, I think it's very clear. I think looking back now, especially when listening to the way you read it, I've forgotten. I think if I had been smarter, I would have phrased everything a bit more diplomatically. So I failed in diplomacy.
How would you have phrased it differently? Just out of curiosity.
Actually one thing I didn't do, which some of my friends told me. I know I have many good friends, and some of them said to me, Kishore, you should have sent me the article for vetting, and I would have helped you, put it in and that was a mistake I made. I wrote it unfortunately, I wrote that article in a hurry and sent it off in a hurry. And looking back now, I realize it's prudent when you write an article out, always let it sit for a while and then come back to it. That's what I should have done.
It's gracious of you. What I find intriguing is that you spent 26 years, writing these books, and you started by asking the question in your first book, can Asians think? And right through, your thesis has always been, is going to be an Asian century, a Pacific century. And that suggests, therefore, that China, or perhaps China and India, could at some point overtake many Western countries. If I were a Western country, and book after book, if I were USA in particular, book after book is critical of me, is suggesting that my days are numbered. Why should I not declare you persona non grata? Were you? What was the reaction you got from the USA and many parts of Europe in your thesis, which was dogged and consistent for 26 years?
Well, I think the answer to your question is actually provided on the back cover of every book that I produce. Even Can Asians Think? Got an endorsement from Henry Kissinger. So,
by the way, that's my favorite book.
Yeah, the interesting question to ask is, why have my books been endorsed by some of the leading thinkers in the West? And this is the great paradox about the West, you see. And I think people in the West who read my books understand that I'm not trying to demolish the West. They understand that I'm a friend of the West in telling the West, you lost your way, right? You're making some huge mistakes. And the mistake they're making is a very simple, fundamental mistake, which the more thoughtful observers agree with me, that the past 200 years of Western domination of world history has been a major historical aberration. You know, from the year 1 to the year 1820, the two largest economies of the world were always those of China and India. So the past 200 years, where initially Europe took off, North America took off, have been an aberration. And the reason why I'm so glad to be alive today is that I feel glad I'm alive to see, on the one hand, the end of Western domination of world history and the return of Asia. And this is a remarkably exciting time. So what's driving the writing of my books is an awareness that I'm living at an amazing historical moment of history. And at the same time, my friends in the West who are trying to understand Asia believe that the one person who can explain the rise of Asia to them is me. And if you look at the blurb that Larry Summers gave me for the New Asian Hemisphere, he said, Larry Summers, who was the former U.S. Treasury Secretary, former President of Harvard, former Chief Economist, World Bank, said in the blurb that, 300 years from now, the big story that the world will be talking about will be about how Asia returned at this time. And if there's one person who can explain it to us, it's Kishore Mahbubani.
But Kishore, how would you respond to your detractors or your critics that you've lost your objectivity in the process? Perhaps you've become too close and perhaps even fallen in love with your thesis, that you are not able to, even with the best effort, to see objectively that China also has with its strength, it has its flaws. Have you lost that neutrality somewhat, you think? I mean, it's a fair question. What's your response?
Can you name me one nation without flaws?
No. I mean,
every nation has got its flaws.
But some nations have more than their fair share.
The more thoughtful, why would very thoughtful people endorse a book like Has China Won, right? And by the way, one of probably the greatest strategic thinker that America has produced in the last 50, 60 years was Henry Kissinger, right? And in my book, Has China Won, I make it very clear that the whole book rests on a central premise given, an insight given to me by Henry Kissinger, which is that in this contest that's developing between US and China, the United States doesn't have a comprehensive long-term strategy for managing the US-China contest, but China does have a comprehensive long-term strategy. And people who think that this is, I say that is from Kissinger, and all you have to do is read Kissinger's book on China, and in the first chapter, he explains at greater length what I say in my book, Has China Won?
I mean,
so you wouldn't characterize Henry Kissinger as pro-China for saying that. Actually, both Henry Kissinger and I are telling our American friends, hey, wake up. You don't have a strategy. The other side has a strategy. And the biggest mistake that United States is making is not overestimating China, they're underestimating China and what China is doing. Now, obviously, if I am pro-China, if I think China is going to win, I should keep quiet. But I'm telling my American friends, wake up. The challenge you're taking on is much bigger than you think to be. This is not a contest between the United States and the Communist Party of China. This is a contest between the United States and a 4,000-year-old civilization that has been here much longer. And by the way, I can tell you this, when I was invited by the Harvard Kennedy School to deliver the annual lecture. By the way, the first two people to give an annual lecture was President George H.W. Bush and Mr. Gorbachev. So I was in that group who delivered that lecture. And when I gave the lecture on the subject, what happens when China becomes number one, that lecture at Harvard University has now had 4 million views on YouTube. 4 million. So why, and many of this from the West, by the way, why would the West listen to me if I was just a propagandist for China? The West listens to me because I try to explain the real China to them. And of course, the real China goes against the traditional Anglo-Saxon narrative. And the Anglo-Saxon narrative, sadly, and by the way, the more thoughtful people in the Anglo-Saxon world agree with me, has become propagandistic. And they're undermining themselves,
Right.
because at the end of the day, the advice of Sun Tzu was valid: know thyself, know thine enemy, fight 1,000 battles, win 1,000 battles. And if you don't understand your enemy, you don't understand how China is succeeding and thriving, then you're going to end up being in a difficult position. And by the way, I must emphasize to you that the more thoughtful people in the Anglo-Saxon world read my books and endorse my books because they realize I'm trying to help the West.
So, is there something here that we can learn from the West, like the USA? They have not dismissed you. Some have. They have not dismissed you. They're still inviting you back. Your book launch, one of the venues is Harvard University, and as well as New York, from what I understand. Now, what is it that makes them, even though they disagree with you, even though you're critical of them, to continue to invite you?
And at the end of the day, when people from the West speak to me, they feel that they're speaking to a member of their tribe, because, as you know, my undergraduate training was in Western philosophy. So when I argue with people in the West, they can immediately recognize what I'm saying, because I'm using the concepts
And how you're
and
saying.
ideas and structures and metaphors that come from the Western universe. So they feel that they can talk to me directly. So, you know, so if you look at my book, my memoirs, as I said, it's a tribute to my mother. It's a tribute to the 3 founding fathers of Singapore who taught me so much. And it's also a tribute to the Western philosophy that I learned. And I describe how amazingly excited I was when I was studying Western philosophy at the National University of Singapore. And as you know, if you read my memoirs, you'll see that I wasn't supposed to go to university. Instead of being in university reading about Wittgenstein or R.M. Hare, I should have been a Sindhi
Selling
textile
textiles.
salesman selling textiles. So that's another reason for my memoirs. I want to say a thank you note to Singapore for having given me this incredible opportunities to grow and thrive. Because if I hadn't had the President's Scholarship in 1967, I wouldn't be here talking to you.
Some people have said that you are, it's all about self-promotion. Your books, your articulation of your thoughts, the manner in which you articulate them, all of them is about promoting yourself. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would encourage everybody to promote themselves. In fact, when I was dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, I used to tell the young academics, okay, and I say, you're writing all these things. They're wonderful. But if nobody reads them, what's the point? The whole point of writing is to make sure that people read them. And at the end of the day, if you carry out self-promotion, And if you promote a whiskey and it tastes terrible, nobody will buy it, even if you promoted it 1,000 times. So the question, therefore, is there is an open marketplace of ideas globally. Anybody can compete in it. Anybody can compete in it. Why do some people keep getting invited back to the leading universities, to the leading fora? Why is it that some people, their books sell and travel around the world and get cited and quoted? So it's not self-promotion. You're promoting ideas that resonate with the world. At the end of the day, I'm not promoting my personality. At the end of the day, I say, read what I've written. And that's what I hope your viewers will do. Because at the end of the day, whatever I'll be judged by will be what I've written. And I can tell you, by the way, that the big lesson I have learned in life is that you can write articles. Articles disappear overnight. But books are these enormous arrows that you shoot into the future. They can be cited 10, 20, maybe even 100 years from now. So I would encourage all my fellow Singaporeans to engage in shameless self-promotion by writing books.
Kishore Mahbubani, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.